A very good evening, one and all. I hope everyone present today is doing well. On behalf of the entire team of Sai Health Foundation, it gives me immense pleasure to welcome you all for the sixth knowledge sharing session of Sai Health Foundation on the topic Layman's Lessons from the Pandemic. Um, we have been having these knowledge sharing sessions every month successfully as a part of the activities that we conduct at Sai Health Foundation. Let me brief you all about our NGO. Sai Health Foundation is an NGO that was founded 2 decades ago with the sole purpose of spreading health awareness among people regarding the preventive health. We aim at contributing to making a disease-free society. The main objective of Sai Health Foundation is to spread awareness through conducting lectures and having training programs in the MSME sectors for the migrant workers. Regarding today's program, so coming to today's session, there is a lot of information on social media, television articles regarding the COVID-19 pandemic. So our main objective about today's program is to get information from an expert in the field of public health. For this purpose, we have with us Dr. Joe Thomas, who's a very eminent speaker and an expert in the field of public health. He has been a health advisor to many countries. A very warm welcome to you, sir, and thank you for taking out your valuable time and joining us today. I am also very happy that we have our president of Sai Health Foundation, Mr. Mohan Nair, sir, our trustees, and people from all walks of life from all over the globe. I welcome you all, and I am sure that today's program will be a great success. I now request Mrs. Vinita Nair to introduce us to our speaker, Dr. Joe Thomas. And also a small request to all the participants to mute their audio and to turn off their videos. Thank you. Vinita ma'am?
Yes. Thank you, Dr. Farah.
You're welcome.
A warm good evening, everyone. I'm really privileged to have the pleasant task of introducing you all to our guest speaker, Dr. Joe Thomas, this evening.
You get his chat on your own. That chat.
I request everyone to please mute their audios. Dr. Thomas has completed MSc and is a PhD. He's an accomplished international development professional, academician, public policy expert, and human rights activist. He is associated with various organizations and has worked with 26 developing countries. He has provided leadership for strategic planning, policy guidance, and program management. Currently, Professor Thomas is teaching health and sustained development at the MIT World Peace University, and he is the Associate Dean of Faculty of Sustainability Studies at MIT World Peace University. At MIT World Peace University, he is supervising the establishment of 5 new schools and 9 new transdisciplinary master's programs in sustainable development, public health, and philosophy. In addition to this, he is a master's in public health program, MA in philosophy, Center for Peace and Conflict Studies, and rural immersion-based learning supporting more than 7,000 students. He has also has overall responsibility for PhD programs in sustainable development, public health, disaster management, and is managing 30 senior level staff. He has been associated and has served as an advisor to the Ministry of Health in East Timor, short-term technical advisor to the WHO, AIDS and Hepatitis, and FXB International. Dr. Thomas is experienced and highly skilled in program development, program management, and in providing high-level advice to the ministerial, diplomatic staff, senior officials, and elected representatives. As executive director, he provided leadership and was a representative voice of the 26th government of the Global South on sustainable development, sexual and reproductive health, family planning, gender, equity rights, population dynamics, and South-to-South cooperation. Dr. Thomas has multi-country work experience in Australia, India, South Africa, Hong Kong, Nepal, Bangladesh, and East Timor. He is an author of 2 books and has published more than 50 articles in peer-reviewed journals. He has served as the Senior Research Officer of Indian Council of Medical Research, HIV Program Director of National Addiction Research Center in Mumbai, and the City of University of Hong Kong. Sir, it is indeed an honor to have you with us in this knowledge sharing session this evening, and we look forward to an informative session with you. I now request Mr. Mohan Nair to please take over the proceedings.
Good evening to all of you. Thank you, Dr. Pada and Dr. Vinita for being a good host and starting the program. I'm grateful to all of you, especially Dr. Joe Thomas, for coming for this program. He had last 3 months I was trying to get his date, but it was so difficult for me because of his preoccupation. Sir, thank you very much for coming for today's program. I am very honored to have more than 80 participants who have joined the program today from different parts of the world and different parts of our country. Friends, we all have recently witnessed the second wave of COVID-19. The pandemic has threatened our lives. We have all now realized the value of health. The unfortunate incident highlights the ill-preparedness of the nation's health infrastructure, massive shortage of health products. As a nation, all of us realized the cost of health and the effect on economy. This is a time for government and society to work together to combat this grave threat to our lives and livelihoods. A time for all of us to stand up and work together rather than criticize, to ensure that this human suffering is totally removed and we come out of it. We will also be very happy to see if as a nation we stand together and come out of this crisis. I'm extremely happy that so many people have come from different walks of life, and I'm extremely happy because most of us are from middle class, upper middle class, and we are people who normally debate, discuss, but we rarely participate. I would request you to join the Sahel Foundation movement. I call it a movement because we don't expect anything from members but to just share their thoughts, be a facility, give us guidance to develop modules. I just want to tell one more thing, that Sahel Foundation has been working primarily in their business of bringing preventive healthcare. 17 years ago, we started this. We never worked on curative health. And today we realize that preventive health is very important. One of our unique work which we have done in the last few years is to go to unorganized labor. We call it now migrant labor because it has become popular now. But we have been working with migrant labor, workers, employees working in MSME and training them on 14 modules of health. These are done not by doctors but ordinary people, members from our organization. We have trained more than 5,000 people. We are very happy to inform you that most of the places where we train, there were less infection because people are very preventive in their approach. Their mindset was towards prevention. I think as a society, as rightly said by Dr. Joe when I was conversing with him, there is not much of civil society activities in health. I request all of you that a time has come, you have to come forward and do something towards health. With this introduction of Sahel Foundation, I go to Dr. Joe Thomas. In fact, I have not met him yet. I got introduced to him through Mr. Nathan because they were in Singapore together. And he told me about Dr. Joe. I spoke to him 2-3 times and I've organized this program with some other platforms, some other forums. I have only one thing to tell. Vinita has introduced him. He's a very humble person. He has got many students who have taken PhD under him. And one great thing about him, he has set up many schools of public healthcare across the country and outside India. And one more rare feat in his life, he was one of the persons who has addressed the United Nations on the Sustainability Development Goals, which I think is a very, very great achievement for an ordinary person. He comes from Kerala, from a very humble background, and right now he is a citizen of Melbourne. He actually teaches and advises the Australian government, but he has been asked by the Karad family, who owns MIT College, to set up the new school for public healthcare and sustainability. With these few words, I welcome Dr. Joe, and I'm sure that he will be able to tell us something which, as a layman, we have not understood. So, some lessons for the layman from this pandemic. Welcome to Dr. Joe. Over to you, Dr. Joe. Thank you.
Thank you, Mohan sir. Thank you. And thank you for inviting me for this meeting. And it's extremely privileged to see that more than 90 people are here in this session on a Saturday evening. And indeed, it's a privilege, and it makes me a bit nervous on two reasons. When we had a discussion, Mohan sir, he said, don't go for too much of slides. And then second, he said, don't come out with too much of a statistics. As a teacher, we thrive on PowerPoint. And he said, don't go for more than 2-3 PowerPoint. So then I'm in a fix because we are quite used to coming out with 30-40 slides, then we go on that. So today, and also, this is a dialogue. This is a knowledge sharing. And I wish it's not a one-way traffic and I keep on speaking and you listen. And at some point of time, probably we can have a true dialogue. So this is the second thing. And again, before I get into my session, I really wanted to congratulate the Sai Trust for Health, because as I mentioned earlier, there are very few agencies, not talking about healthcare hospitals, non-hospital civil society involvement in health, it's not very much, and that too, there are some doctors are doing, non-clinicians doing in public health is very limited. And also their activities are very time bound. So today what I want to share with you is about 8 points. I just wanted to briefly touch upon the magnitude of the pandemic. And today, when you talk about a truly global pandemic, COVID is a truly pandemic, and what is its significance? And I just wanted to touch upon the infectious diseases, a brief history, endemic, pandemic, epidemic. So how this is intersecting and why we should be concerned about it. And how to understand the causes and consequences of pandemic like COVID pandemic. And also there is very unique issue of our today's pandemic is that we have a lot of information sources. Earlier we used to hear from maybe a doctor, maybe a nurse, maybe some of our friends. So maybe we read something from the newspaper. That is our source of health information. Today we have an explosion of source of health information. We have social media university, we jokingly say, but that also brings in certain difficulty. We have to decide what is the true information and how do you identify the true information or reliable information. So this I just wanted to briefly touch upon that. And also, what is the impact of the pandemic? Social impact, economic impact, cultural impact, political impact, and truly a global impact. And also the impact is not uniformly impacting on everybody. It's impacting on women, children, and elderly in a different way. I'll just briefly on that. And also it creating certain challenges. COVID pandemic is creating perceptional challenges about our thinking. It is being challenged. And also there are institutional challenges. These are all very unique challenges. And also what is my take home message? So this is what I want to talk about it. And probably I'll take about 15 to 20 minutes. Then I hope we can have some interaction and question answer. And as a teacher, let me begin with a story. When I interview students for my Masters in Public Health program, and interestingly, I interviewed last time about more than 100 students for my 40 seats. And I interviewed about 100 students, but 100 parents interviewed me. When I thought about attending this class, this session, immediately I thought about the parents interviewing me. I can interview the students and get away with it, but parents really grill me. So somehow when I thought about talking to you guys, the parents or the students reminded me. So I'm getting ready to be grilled by some of you, and I'm getting ready from my experience of the parents of my students grilling me. So anyway, thank you for this session. And when we talk about the magnitude of the pandemic, I'm not giving any number. We know what is the number, the death rate, and all you must have flooded with that number. What you have to remember is that practically most of the 180 countries are affected by the pandemic. And African countries, they're slowly getting into it. And the infection is different stages of the progression. In some countries, it's the first wave, some countries in second wave, third country, some other countries, what we call it a third set of wave. So even the concept of a wave of infection, that itself is something new. So what you have to remember is that as a truly a global pandemic is a product of a globalized society. And till recently, we talk about the benefit of globalization and the benefit of being part of a global society. And also we talk about Vasudeva Kudumbakam. But then probably this is a side effect of this globalization. Globalization comes with both positive and negative aspect. Probably the globalization of pandemic, probably that's the one thing we haven't prepared ourselves. So this is not as a criticism. This is one of the lessons we learned from dealing with this pandemic for the last almost 1 year. This we are going to get into second year. And the second aspect of the globalization is, number one, the solution for this problem. The vaccination came from a global effort. We know that unlike many other diseases, COVID vaccination, and we managed to come out with a vaccine within less than 6 months. Any other disease, we know that it normally takes several years. 6 to 7 years is the thumb rule to bring a vaccine to the market, from conceptualization to the marketing stage. But the COVID pandemic, and as a response, yes, is it for me, the message, hello? Okay, so in the COVID pandemic, we managed to come out with a solution, a vaccine within a very short span of time. I just wanted to mention briefly about this short span of time because many people suggested that how do we manage to come out with a vaccine with such a short time? Because the vaccination is a long effort. See, one thing is our effort, our mastery of the information technology. Because of what happened is when the clinical trial began, and immediately the data was transmitted to the regulatory authorities, and they could look at the data on a real-time basis. So this is one of the advantages of the globalization. And the another aspect is that the global society, the global scientific community, they pool their technology together, they pool the information together. And also we managed to come out with a new approach towards vaccine creation because of the COVID pandemic. Maybe we could say that the COVID pandemic created certain innovation in the scientific study. It created certain innovation, the way we treat medicine, the way we treat certain diseases. See, for example, the COVID vaccine, one of the major approach, what we call it as messenger RNA. The messenger RNA approach towards creating a vaccine, it could be utilized for treating maybe cancer, maybe treating diabetics, some of them the serious disease we are trying to grapple with, that may be treated by messenger RNA. So that's a message coming up. And also our prediction is that next term, the Nobel Prize for the medicine may come for the one who discovered the messenger RNA vaccine. So we can see that who may be going to get in as a candidate for the next global the Nobel Prize. So this is just a side remarks to make that. And also when you talk about the magnitude again creates certain difficulty. The issue of logistics, if you look at the impact of COVID pandemic, one of the major impact is on global logistics, the distribution of medicine, distribution of goods, distribution of diagnostic, distribution of treatment. So the distribution pattern got affected by the pandemic. Many of the distribution institutions, they shut down because of the fear of infection. So because of that, when we try to, our discovery of the vaccine, when we try to distribute globally, the logistic issues comes in. So we managed to come out with a scientific breakthrough. At the same time, we didn't manage to come out that effectively in creating an effective logistic mechanism because of the pandemic. So this is again another dimension of the globalization, a global pandemic. And also when you talk about, COVID pandemic is not the first pandemic. It's not the first disease. We know that in the human history, human civilization, if you look at the history of infectious disease, there is either a viral infection or a bacterial infection, which is killing a large number of people. If you look at again the history about 100 years ago, the pandemic used to kill a large number of population. We even say that one of the population control mechanism was the infectious diseases. In the traditional, historically, we're looking at, we know the plague, we heard about it, the issue of, I mean, there's several history of pandemics in coming in the human civilization and human society. Even when you look at the recent history, and even today, there are other pandemics is going on, there are other epidemics is going on. We know that the HIV infection, the AIDS epidemic is still going on. It kills about 30 million people in a year. And overall, it killed about 30 million people, mostly young people and people from the very reproductive age group. And we know that Ebola virus is still creating difficulty in Central African region. But at the same time, we have the triumph of polio we managed to control. So in the human civilization, we could say that this is a struggle between infectious disease and the scientific discovery. So the science managed to come out with a solution in dealing with many of our pandemics. So that created, that's one of the positive sign of the COVID pandemic. Science is gradually catching up with this. And we even managed to come out with the clinical treatment within the last 6 months. We managed to come out with very effective clinical protocols for how to deal with how to treat people living with the COVID infection. So this is a combination, it comes as a package of scientific discovery. At the same time, it creates extreme human misery. And also it's an extreme way of, we are learning new things on a day-to-day basis. And also, next point, I just wanted to highlight the issue of information explosion. I know that most of you are a member of more than one WhatsApp group. And you get different messages. You get messages saying that you take this medication, you make this concoction, and not even naming that water, that you know that. But the problem is that how do we know that that's true? And people may be sharing it with all the true conviction, with all the true desire that they may be able to contribute towards something for treatment and wellness, well-being of that. But the difficulty is that the health information which are not verified, which are not validated, which are not clarified, and most of the information flooding around in the social media are not verified information. And we don't have very limited third-party verification system of our information. Because earlier, we used to read newspaper, or we used to read journal, we used to read articles. But all this, there is a mechanism, there is at least an editor do a second reading. And maybe the sub-editors will read, maybe some other review people read. But in the COVID pandemic, the COVID situation, the social media, anybody can write. You don't have to be you don't have to be a scientist, you don't have to be a doctor, you can pretend that you're a doctor, you can dish out information. So one of the major difficulty about dealing with the COVID pandemic is what we call it as misinformation. So as a health trust, maybe this is one of the issues you may have to take into consideration as a members. You may have to say that maybe you may not be part of the misinformation campaign. Misinformation means you may not forward any message which you are not verified independently. Or if you are not sure about the source of information, it may sound great, it may sound very useful, it may sound very, contributing towards health and well-being of your colleagues. And also it may sound common sense. But sometimes common sense alone will not give the clarity about what we need certain medical decision making related with health and well-being. So one of my requests, one of my suggestions is that be careful about what you forward in social media, whether those information is verified, clarified. If you have any doubt about it, you ask the person who forwarded what's the source of information. And WHO, in the occasional media briefing, they said the media explosion, the information explosion about COVID pandemic is becoming an epidemic level. And this epidemic the media explosion and also is a deliberate misinformation explosion is one of the major issues. And I would say that when you talk about layman's lessons to be learned, and one of the major lessons is how to deal with the media explosion, the health information coming through social media. As a layman, as an ordinary person, how do you deal with information? What is your rapid methodology? If you see that who sent the information, who wrote that information, is it a medically qualified? Sometimes I notice that the name of a qualified professional, you can see anonymous messages or plagiarized messages. So even the name itself may not give a guarantee that the information what you're getting is a genuine information. So one way to do is that go back to the original sources. As soon as you get a message, please spend some time to see and verify. There are many sources where we can verify the source or legitimacy or whether information is right. So my message is that before you forward a message, health-related message, COVID-related message, or any infection disease or any health-related message, make sure that that's a valid information. Make sure that that is a legitimate information. Make sure that that is coming from a reliable source. So this is one of the major side show, what I call it as in the main the issue of the COVID pandemic, how to deal with it, and how to deal with the issue of information explosion. And also when you look at the other point I want to look at is that many people ask, what is the cause of the COVID pandemic? And how do we look at the consequences of the pandemic? Because many people come out with many reasons for the pandemic. Some people say that this is a God's punishment. And I don't think all the gods I am aware of, they are compassionate gods. The gods are willing to help the human beings. The gods are ready to be with the human being when they are in difficulty. So I don't think that the pandemics are a God's punishment. So that let me leave it there. But my presentation, I wanted to focus more on the science and the science-related interpretation of the COVID pandemic, and also the overall the infectious disease issues. So number one, many people ask what is the source of the COVID pandemic. When we look at the history of global pandemic, most of the pandemics came from animals to human beings. Or in a very layman's language, we can say that one species, another species. Of the disease, what happened is a species jump. It can be any kind of species, any kind of animal, but most of the pandemic, most of the epidemic in the recent history, the source was different kind of animals. The Nipah virus came from, we call it as maybe it came from a bat family, and even the COVID pandemic, maybe in some of the exotic animals sold in the wet market in China. So, and also if you take the case of H1N1 virus, which killed chicken in a large number, so most of this infection came from another animal. And when you look at little more carefully, also you have to remember that these animals are mostly confined into forest. And why they came out of the forest, that's mostly because of human activity, human encroach into the habitat of the wild animals. It can be bats, it can be small animals, it can be small vertebrates, but generally the human encroachment of the habitat. That means human beings are expanding our territory to the wild part of the human habitat. So the more, because in many countries the coverage, the green coverage, or maybe the forest coverage is shrinking. See, one of the consequences of the green coverage, the forest coverage shrinking is the habitat of many of the animals also shrinking. So the wild animal and human being conflict is becoming, the frequency is increasing. Those who are closely monitoring the stories of in the rural areas, the wild animals and human beings, the wild boar, wild buffaloes, you name it, there is an increasing incidence of wild animals and human being conflict is increasing. And in future also, if you look at this, the shrinking the habitat of the wild animals, it may lead towards much greater the conflict between human beings and the wild animal. So if you look at from that point of view, we are talking about the second wave of pandemic. Probably a new pandemic could come as a new wave, not as a COVID, maybe another infectious disease which is impacting on the lungs, and maybe it's spread through the air. And spread through the air and spread through water is the most effective, the way to rapidly spread a disease and infection in the human society. So if you look at the history of pandemics, if you look at the history of epidemic, and maybe we are not even prepared for the next pandemic, forget about today's pandemic, what we're living with today. So that way, this is not a very consoling message I'm putting forward, that the society, human society in general is not ready for the next pandemic. And also some of the scientists, they go one step further and they're more pessimistic, saying that, and we are dealing with the COVID pandemic in the shadow of environmental disaster. We are rapidly facing an environmental disaster, and mostly air pollution, and also the climatic change. Climatic change is getting a very dramatic area, and the climatic change, the temperature change is getting drastic, and also the frequency of the flooding, the frequency of even our monsoon season is changing, the intensity is changing. So in nutshell, we are also simultaneously with the epidemic, from a public health challenge, we are also facing an imminent natural calamity. In many parts of the country, we notice that the natural calamity, the frequency is increasing. The temperature of the entire planet is slowly increasing. And also we notice that the conflict between sea and the habitat at the seashore is increasingly becoming very drastic. So the next pandemic, along with the next natural calamity. So this is the direst prediction we are talking about. We are talking about a next pandemic, and also we are talking about the probability of next pandemic with an environmental catastrophe. And we are nowhere, we are ready to deal with such kind of a scenario. But probably the national planning, it's not a national issue anymore. The global pandemic, maybe the global institutions may have to look at this issue very carefully. But just as a side story, let me tell you that I happened to review the agenda of the UN Security Council for the month of May. And we expect that Security Council may take a global leadership to look at the issue of COVID pandemic. But interestingly, the entire work plan for the UN Security Council, there is no mention about how to deal with a global response towards COVID pandemic. They left the responsibility of creating a global response towards COVID pandemic to one of the specialized agency called World Health Organization. But we know that, I mentioned about the magnitude of the global dimension of the pandemic. If we had to deal with truly on a globalized, we are not seeing an optimal global solution that has got serious implication on the national level. And this also may be part of the civil society's responsibility. When you look at a large civil society like Sai Health Foundation, and also I know that you're a global institution, maybe you have to keep one eye on what's happening about the global preparedness to deal with the pandemic, global preparedness to deal with the human well-being, and global preparedness to deal with health in a different context. So what I'm saying is that probably health has to come into the forefront of our global dialogue, our national dialogue, our local dialogue. Somehow health is not into the prominence of our national dialogue. I'll come to that, elaborate little more. And I just wanted to, as a teacher, I'm tempted to come out with some number. Our investment in the health sector is less than 1.5% of the national GDP. And 1.5%, when you look at the inflation, it's almost disinvestment. Those of economists, people, the commerce and economics, you calculated. The investment in health for several years is a disinvestment in the health sector. And maybe this is a time to look at health in a different way. Any civilized society, the health is the basic infrastructure for the social development. And the infrastructure development, when you talk about infrastructure, we understand it as roads, maybe airports, maybe a port. But maybe we had to look at infrastructure as a healthy population. As a civil society, maybe this is one of the messages you have to take it very carefully. You're contributing towards nation building. You're contributing towards healthy population. Healthy population is the most essential infrastructure for national building. And that particular, somehow we left out of this. And also when we look at the impact of COVID pandemic, and it is again, the impact is not uniform. The impact on children, impact on women, impact on elderly is all differently. And also impact on poor people is different from impact on a resource-rich person. So one way, if you look at carefully, the COVID pandemic is a pandemic of health inequity. The COVID pandemic amplifies health inequity. The COVID pandemic related consequences are, and it demonstrates the extent of health inequity in the society. So I would say that we have to understand the magnitude and nature of the impact of COVID pandemic in society. how that is accelerates, how that increase the health inequity. So any intervention need to look at it carefully. What is the objective of any intervention in the area of COVID pandemic? That should lead towards reducing health inequity. If you have a mitigation effect, and that should make sure that it is reducing the health inequity induced by the consequences of the COVID pandemic. So this is the one thing, that message you take home. When you talk about health intervention, you have to think about what is the health situation. You have to analyze the health situation. Then you come out with your intervention strategies. And intervention by the state, intervention by civil society, intervention by the individuals at the local level, national level, at the global level. And why I'm mentioning global level, India is a member of the UN Security Council. And maybe this is an opportunity for India to play a diplomatic role in the global level. And we know that India sent a vaccine to them, even when we have difficulty to meet our own needs. But we were generous enough to share our vaccine with almost 60 countries, poor countries, not the rich countries. We didn't sold it for making money. So it is a very genuine humanitarian gesture we demonstrated. But I hope this will be sustained much further. But why again I'm mentioning is that India has got a global responsibility and global role, particularly in the context of the COVID pandemic, and also preparing the future pandemic. And we know that we have the capacity to manufacture the medicine. And today, even the vaccine, we have many countries, and probably government may expand. They may call for a tender to anybody who can make vaccine, and COVID-related medicine should be allowed to manufacture and vaccines and medicine. I hope that kind of a call may come sometime soon. I wish that may come soon, because we have the technical capacity to manufacture oxygen, we have the technical capacity to manufacture the diagnostic material. So it's a matter of facilitating that production capacity, the production possibility. So these are some of the issues. And what you have to remember is that this is a new phenomena. So many of the government, many of the institutions, many of our advisors, they were caught little bit unaware of that, because we are little over enthusiastic that the third wave may not be this aggressive. But one difficulty is that we don't have any historical data to see that. I'm talking about our immediate historical experience, how a pandemic can be truly catastrophic, in what extent we didn't anticipate it. It's not in our part of our data, evidence, and experience. That way we have certain level of, we can, when we analyze it, we can console ourselves that nobody really anticipated the depth and magnitude of the destruction can be caused by the COVID pandemic. So this is when I talk about the differential impact, I just wanted to mention about these three groups. Maybe the largest group of population who are affected disproportionately are older population. It is not only affected, and today we know that the longevity of the elderly population, that's one of the gift of the human civilization to the older people, because of our scientific discovery, because of our understanding about health, because of our understanding about how to promote health and well-being. We have a greater understanding about how to extend our longevity. But the longevity, one of the key factors for longevity is our social connectedness. If you look at carefully how people are living longer life expectancy is increasing dramatically, and that is impacted not by a clinical or medical factor, a social factor called social connectedness. Those who are well connected in the society, means you're a member of organization, you're a member of organization like Sai Health Foundation, you're a member of the local housing society. So, there are operational issues. If you're a member of any of, if you're a member of any of these organizations, that lead towards your longevity. But COVID pandemic, and what happened is that our effort towards to create social connectedness, social connection, that is what, and particularly elderly population's opportunity for social connection, maintaining the social connectivity is rapidly deteriorated or rapidly discouraged because of the COVID pandemic for the right reason. So this is one factor, how disproportionately elderly population is affected. And the second, elderly population died not because of the COVID pandemic. They didn't get the right treatment at the right time. because our healthcare system was not prepared to deal with elderly population. And I have seen many people who are elderly population who are struggling with the healthcare system. And what we notice is that in the general health system, there is a tendency to ignore the health and well-being of the older people. And what I call it as it's an ageism. Means older people are not worth taking care of. Older people's healthcare needs are undermined, and older people's healthcare needs, for example, I've seen that when you go to hospital with an elderly person, they do all the diagnostic tests, but nobody look at the result of the diagnostic result. And by the time you know that if you act on certain diagnostic result, their life could have been prolonged. You do the routine testing and you get them admitted, but not acting on the result of the diagnostic process. This is becoming a very common practice across, the healthcare system. The ageism, a discrimination because of the person is age and they look age. So the quality of the care is compromised. And now in the context of the COVID pandemic, many hospitals, many healthcare providers are forced to take prioritization. And they are in a very awkward situation. They have to decide whether an elderly person with extremely very sharp caliber intellectual capacity should die or live, or a younger person who hasn't even contributed anything to society should live. And this decision is left to an ordinary young medical doctor. And I would say that there's a criminal responsibility on them, and the society should have removed them from that decision making. They should not be the one who to decide whether who should live and who should die. And we should not allow them to act as a god. That let the god do God's job, let the doctor do doctor's job, and the society should facilitate that their decision making. They should not be put into a situation that whether an elderly person should live and a younger person should live. This is happening because of our lack of preparedness. The COVID pandemic we could have met if we had a functional primary healthcare center. And I don't know whether those who are familiar with the healthcare system, there is a slogan saying that health for all by year 2000. Now we are talking about 2021. So this slogan was in the society, in the global society, and many agencies, they took up this as a slogan. WHO, their slogan was health for all by 2020. Most of the governments endorsed it, but didn't move because our investment in primary healthcare didn't expand it. An oxygen at the primary healthcare center to a reasonable number of people, and also maybe a ventilator at the PHC level, trained person to handle it, maybe the pressure on a tertiary level hospital would have reduced. So my point is that COVID pandemic gives us an opportunity to relook our healthcare system. What should be our commitment towards healthcare system? And in this context, I want to compare. Many people call now doctors, nurses as warriors, and they are the new soldiers. But I just want to make a clear distinction between professional soldiers and the professional healthcare providers. I know some of the people in the audience are well-decorated soldiers and well-decorated veterans in the army. And with all the due respect to your contribution, I just want to, thinking level, I just want to present a case. In India, more than 800 doctors and nurses died because of COVID pandemic. And there is not much of a great hoo-ha in the newspaper. Suppose 800 soldiers would have died, what would have been the situation? That means our emphasis on human security versus border security, today we have to have a relook at it. We need to have a re-emphasis on human security. Human security means security of doctors, our nurses, our patients. Whatever need to be done to expand the human security. The health security is as important as the border security. Maybe this thinking is evolved out of our response, our effort towards dealing with COVID pandemic. And also I can take it forward. Maybe we should identify, acknowledge each and every doctor, nurses, and healthcare provider died because of the COVID pandemic, and they should be acknowledged, and they should be awarded, and they should be acknowledged in the society. Like we give a Veera Chakra, Parama Veera Chakra. Maybe in the healthcare system, we should create a separate an institution to award them, institution to reward them, institution to acknowledge them. Maybe I would say that the Sai Health Foundation should take an effort to identify all the doctors and nurses who died in the COVID pandemic and acknowledge them, give them an award, and for the glorious contribution they made to the society. So this is the great contribution you can make. And this is a message you can say that in today's context, who are our heroes? Our heroes should be doctors, nurses. And also we have to understand that when I compare and contrast with the border security doctrine, our doctrine of security need to be expanded to include the security of a human person, security of the health institutions. Our doctrine of security and is narrowly defined right now only as a border security. And rhetorically, I'll ask a question. We have a very sophisticated intelligence mechanism. We have counterintelligence mechanism, and we spend millions of rupees on that. But none of this intelligence mechanism and counterintelligence mechanism didn't manage to flag the COVID pandemic, didn't manage to flag our our second wave of epidemic. So that means we have to look at our intelligence mechanism, whether it's value for money. And maybe, probably the best public relationship our political leaders can make today is that they could declare, along with the Indian border security in the military, they could say that we are going to declare a 5% freeze on all the defense spending. And that as an emergency situation, we are going to use it for strengthening our healthcare system and go for a global diplomacy and request the global community, say, protect our border security. We rely on the global community, the UN Security Council, Global Health Assembly. So increase our global diplomatic opportunity by reducing this 5% defense mechanism and use that money for them rapidly as an emergency basis. It's a war footing. We should expand our primary healthcare setting and primary healthcare services that way. And any civilized society should have minimum 5% of the GDP should be investing in health. Even a country like Bangladesh investing 4% of the GDP for health. Bangladesh, they invested at some point in time 14% of the GDP for health. So as a Sai Health Foundation, my message to you is that look at the investment in healthcare. And also state is not the only mechanism for the health financing. Health financing is done by different mechanisms. In many countries, in the Indian society, many people are going to be poor because of their catastrophic health expenditure because of the COVID pandemic. Many middle class, lower middle class, upper middle class, they're forced to spend huge amount of unanticipated catastrophic expenditure on healthcare. But this expenditure is displacing this resources should have gone for children's education, children's skill development, and children's expansion of their opportunities. This is the money we're investing on our disproportionately on the members, the people who are infected by COVID pandemic. I would say that the catastrophic health expenditure is a new phenomena which we didn't anticipate it. And this is partially because of our public healthcare system is systematically there's disinvestment occurred, but somehow we didn't thought about the importance of that. This is not a criticism of one government or one party or one political dispensation. This is a collective responsibility. And health financing is a responsibility of the state, foundations, individuals, and also collectively insurance and that kind of thing. The health financing is always comes through different sources, not by state alone. But at the same time, one of the lessons we have to learn from the COVID pandemic is that the impact, the financial implication of the pandemic is beyond our normal expectation. Normal expectation in individual pockets. And you know that many of you, if you reflect immediately among your immediate friends and relatives, the catastrophic expenditure they came. They were in the hospital for 5 days, 10 days, but lakhs of rupees they were forced to shell out. And even if they have insurance, that PPE kit, sometimes it is a lakhs rupees kit is the bill coming from the private hospital. And I had an opportunity to be in the several private hospitals in this pandemic with many of my friends and relatives and taking them to the hospital. So, I disproportionately took more time to look at the issue of health financing as a lesson, but we should learn from that. And also when you look at the impact I mentioned about elderly, and I just went off from the impact on elderly. The elderly care, the geriatric care is another issue. And in Indian national context, maybe this is an opportunity you can look at the issue of a policy on elderly population. We don't have a cohesive national policy on the geriatric care or the older people's policy. Maybe this is an opportunity the foundation can work on it, creating a national policy on elderly care, an institution mechanism, minimum standards of care. There's all lot of work is remaining in the area of looking at the issue of health and well-being of elderly population. And remember that taking care of elderly is also considered as as a pious religious responsibility of, if you look at the Indian cultural ethos. So, but we have to look at little more on the operation level, policy level, program level, what an institution like Sai Foundation can do. That's the one area. Second area, I just want to look at the impact on children. We know that 1 year, children's opportunity for learning skills, and this is how they're learning skills for their occupational learning and also their career growth and career preparation. All this is almost, I would say, that stands still for 1 year. We know that many of the education institutions like MIT World Peace University, we shifted rapidly for our teaching towards online. But the quality of online teaching is a challenge for us, because we never thought about how to ensure the quality of teaching through the online teaching, the digital teaching. And most of the faculty, we didn't even delay 1 day when the 24th March, when the Prime Minister asked for the lockdown, we immediately shifted the next day to online teaching. But the new challenges are coming up. We never thought about how to teach and how to ensure the quality assurance, how to conduct examination, and also how to make sure that students are learning what they're supposed to learn. And also, we rapidly looked at it. About 40 to 50% of the children are looking at the handheld phone, not through laptops. So the technical capacity, access to new technology is still not catched up with the requirement, education requirement online. And this is another challenge came from the COVID pandemic. The third is impacting on women. And the interesting study, I mean, this is not very exciting study about the impact on the COVID pandemic on women. And what we notice is that there's a disproportionately higher incidence of domestic violence. And domestic violence, particularly targeted towards women, is reported through lockdown. And this is going on for 1 year, almost 1 year, and we are getting ready for the second year. It seems all the likelihood, the mid part of the almost half year, next half year also, we'll be on and off of the lockdown. So the domestic violence and the impact on violence on women is disproportionate in the society because of the COVID pandemic. I'm not getting into the reason behind it, but our coping mechanisms are very limited. We don't have a mechanism to deal with it, because normally in the normal settings, if there's a domestic violence occurs, they have different opportunities for move out of that physical environment. And almost 1 year, they could move out of the physical environment, endure the physical violence in the domestic setting. So the higher incidence of domestic violence, particularly targeted towards women, the gender-based violence, is a phenomena which we are closely monitoring as a new phenomena, which is the incidence is increasing. Maybe this is another area I would suggest that the Health Foundation should look at it, how to intervene, how to make sure that their social connectedness is improved, and social connectedness through social media, and also different media. You reach out to your members, your well-wishers, your relatives, as a means for reducing, increasing their social capital and social connectedness. So this may not be immediately a health issue, but we look at carefully, this has got a huge health benefit. So these are some of the new areas you maybe have to look at it. And when I look at it, women, children, and adolescents are the three disproportionately impacted population. Children, again, there is one more dimension we notice that girl children are being left out of the education system. And according to UNICEF, about 700 million children, girl children, will not go back to education system. They're going to be permanently left out of the education system. And if you're going to extend for next 1 more year, definitely that number is going to increase. That means an entire generation, it's not a cliche, entire generation is, their survival skills are going to be compromised. Their technical skills are going to be compromised. Their cognitive skills are going to be compromised. But we don't have a collective effort to reach out and find out a solution for this. On a government level, civil society level, individual level, researchers level, we may have to reach out particularly towards how to compensate children's cognitive learning ability and children's health needs in the lockdown period. So these are one of the major, the phenomena we are noticing. And also we don't have a solution. And also when you talk about children being left out of the school, we know that midday meal is one of the major factor which is reduced our the issue of the nutritional balance in the children. The nutritional support is given through midday meal. Many people may not have thought about it. The nutritional sufficiency is coming through midday meal, in particular Indian context. And remember that in Indian society, more than 50% of children are malnourished. And this is a data size. Quite often we don't even notice that children are malnourished, what extent. And also we know that the Indian context, unexpectedly, about 40% of the children are born underweight. That's a reflection of malnutrition, nutrition imbalance on the the antenatal mothers. All these phenomena are amplified in the COVID pandemic. The malnutrition is amplified among the children. The malnutrition among the antenatal mothers is increased in the children. And when we look at certain specific disease, for example, gestational diabetes, diabetes kicks in the last trimester of the pregnancy of the mothers. Diabetes sets in. That's mostly because of the physical inaction. And also our medical journal, the gestational diabetes data is mostly coming from the Caucasian population. The Caucasian population is only about 4% of the antenatal mothers experience gestational diabetes, whereas in South Asian population, mostly in the Indian population, South Indian population, it can go up to 14-15% of the antenatal mothers are gestational diabetics are experiencing. We are talking about the first-time mothers, 24-25-year-old girls are reporting diabetics at the early diabetic sets in. This is largely linked with our inactivity and physical inactivity, and also the lockdown contributed that again increasingly. And I would just as a side effect, we say that most of the Indian roads are without footpaths, and I would say that the public works department is contributing towards diabetes, and particularly gestational diabetes, because we can walk safely in the public roads, the footpath. This is a side remark, but it has got certain value. That's why I brought in. So the impact on COVID pandemic is on women on a day-to-day basis. We don't have system to monitor this. We don't have the mechanism to reach out. There is no effective intervention not yet evolved. And this is an issue of catching up with it. And the same thing about children's cognitive ability, children's nutritional issues, and also elderly care. The elderly people are left out, and I would say that the issue of ageism is becoming a very serious issue in our national life, and leaving the elderly population not utilizing their capacity. I mean, I'm not talking about elderly population health and well-being from a romanticized version of health and well-being. They are the social contribution. They can make a huge contribution. We talk about young people and the demographic dividend. And today we can talk about second demographic dividend. The people who are after retirement, they are ripe population to contribute towards society, provided there is a rapid and appropriate intervention and to utilize the dividend of the post-retirement age population. And these questions are coming forward because of the COVID pandemic related our thinking, challenging our thinking. And also, and I'll conclude and I'll take a few questions. I just wanted to take home message. We talked about compassion, we talked about empathy. This all ends, once upon a time, we heard about as a spiritual experience. The need for compassion, the need for empathy is no more a spiritual exercise. This is going to be a part of human survival. The COVID pandemic, what is teaching us is that we have to come out with the compassion as part of the political process. Any political leader, any political program should have a large dose of compassion and sympathy to understand the magnitude of the human suffering. And this came from the COVID pandemic. We know the experience of the migrant population. To understand the plight of the migrant population, I would say that we should look at the issue of compassion and empathy. So again, let me emphasize, this is no more a spiritual experience. It is a political experience. It is a political process. Bring in compassion, bring in empathy as part of the political process. This challenge is raised by the COVID pandemic. But still we are looking around, and we have to look at all the programs, all the mitigation effort, looking at COVID pandemic should be essentially guided by these two principles. Reducing the health inequity, a large dose of compassion. Compassion should drive the programs. Otherwise, we'll ask why we should support our neighbor. That is influenced by the concept of compassion. And that is because it's enriched by our idea of empathy, our experience of empathy. So I would say that we need a political compassion, a political dimension of compassion. We need a political dimension of our empathy. But how do you translate it? I would leave it for the audience to look at this way. And finally, I would say that, with, again, all the due respect to our veterans in the audience, we have to look at our doctrine of security. We need to have a doctrine of security which incorporating the security of human beings. We are looking at the security of the doctors, nurses, our healthcare system. I understand the border security is important, but our doctrine of security need to have a new doctrine of security which focuses on the health security, which focusing on the health of the ordinary person on the street, and which also calls for the great investment in the healthcare system, not only from the state, also from the civil society, also from the foundation, and also from our spiritual leaders. I hope our spiritual leaders will speak more about the need for investing on good health and well-being. Not only our spiritual health, our physical health, physical well-being, intellectual health, mental health. And also, I didn't mention that mental health is one of the major impact of the COVID pandemic. We know that adolescent challenges, adolescents, their effort towards or attempted suicide is proportionately increased as part of the direct impact of the COVID pandemic. So in nutshell, I suggest that an agency like Sai Foundation may look at a new mission and new vision for encouraging and strengthening healthcare system. And that should be on the local level, national level, and international level. And also it should be based on very strong element of empathy and compassion. And this already which you are practicing. And third, I hope you should advocate all the religious leaders that they should convert their compassion towards the health and well-being of the society. Thank you very much. And I really thank you for taking your time to listen to me. I'm quite happy to listen from you and learn from you. And I particularly thank you, Mohan sir. Thank you, sir, for giving this opportunity. And I can see Mr. Roy is online, and we have an opportunity to interact with him earlier. And also, I thank all of you who work behind the scene to make it happen. Thank you very much.
Dr. Joe, thank you very much. And I think it was really very informative. And the topic what we chose while our discussion, we as laymen actually understood many things. I'm not going to take much time in concluding because I have got a friend who's going to conclude the session. But I am grateful to you. We are very honored to have such a learned person talking something very unique. And mostly these things are not talked on the media. So thank you so much. I now request we can have a few questions. I think there's one question in the chat box by Dr. Roy Chaudhary. I think we can answer that. And then if you have any, we can have about 2 or 3 questions fast. After Roy Chaudhary's question, I think doctor can answer it.
I could see that one message. I mean, the question is, the second phase is not about numbers anymore, as they have been replaced by names. I guess all of us have a list of names, near and dear ones, who are gone. I completely agree. And the COVID pandemic is no more a number, it's a personal. You ask yourself, just look around, immediate your family members, your friends, your relatives are affected, lost lives, or they're still living with, they're struggling with pandemic. So it's no more number, but and I would particularly say that identify the doctors, nurses, and healthcare providers who lost their life because of pandemic, acknowledge them and honor them. And this could be, that's the one thing we can do, at least agencies like, your foundation. And the second is the mental health toll is going unaddressed. There's a huge gap in attending the psychological mental health, and why is ignored? Please share the views. I completely agree that when you look at the mitigation, COVID mitigation, one of the major gap is about mental health. Because mental health, otherwise also in the overall public health and social, psychosocial issues is an issue which is somehow left under the carpet. It's because of many reasons, because mental health is always linked up with our socio-cultural belief system. And many people believe that it is not a disease. It is a part of impact of maybe spirit or impact of some of our deeds which we have done. So mental health could be, we have to refocus on the issue of mental health, and the stigma attached with the mental health should be, that's what we have to effort on that. And the community-based mental health, and also what effort you can do to reach out to the mental health issues of mental health and articulating it, particularly the mental health challenges of adolescent young people. And we know that the mental health, there are many dimensions of mental health, the very minor levels of anxiety and stress to large extent of a clinical diagnostic level of mental health issues. but the spectrum of mental health challenge is completely left unaddressed. It's maybe because of our lack of institutional mechanism to deal with it, and also lack of human resources to deal with the mental health, because our trained mental health manpower is not matching with any of the need. Maybe when you talk about the post-COVID reconstruction of the society, maybe we should look at the human resource needs to address the mental health issues. I mean, we may have to come out with a long list of post-reconstruction human resource need, because we may have to take it, the post-COVID reconstruction of society as a, I would say that that's one of the national challenge. Maybe this is an emergency challenge. What is our agenda for post-COVID reconstruction of the society? And what are the essential elements, and how we can be part of this? And in that, definitely I agree that mental health should be one part of it.
Yeah, we have got one or two more questions. Can I just ask anybody who wants to ask, please?
There is a question from how we can balance the cosmopolitan model of global justice versus the allegation of biological warfare in the context of COVID-19, violation of right to life, right to health, and many other rights of Universal Declaration of Human Rights. I agree completely. To answer this question, probably I should run another 1 hour, minimum 1 hour webinar. But let me just come to the core of it. One of the challenges about COVID mitigation effort is how to balance between the individual right and collective right. Because we know that people are, I mean, you have to take maybe a special license to go to from one city to another city. We had to take, special travel permit. And in one way, that is a violation of the human right, your right to move, right of mobility. But to what extent we can violate? We should have a very clear understanding about at what stage you violate somebody's right to move. And it should be very clearly justified in the evidence-based public health. Because quite often, this right to violate somebody's right to movement is left to the very grassroots level officials. And they take a decision. A grassroots level police officer can take a decision about who can travel, at what context, when to travel. That clarity about when we can violate, when we can remove the right of a person in the context of pandemic, we haven't done a serious dialogue on this, and we don't have a serious protocols about it. We leave it for them, the ordinary police office to reinterpret it. This will have a long-term implication about as a democratic society, which we cherish the idea of basic right of individual. That's the one thing. Second, the allegation of biological warfare, and I'm not completely, I don't buy that COVID pandemic is a biological warfare, but probably the COVID pandemic, when it initially it exploded, maybe some people must have tried to cover it up. And that is not it's a normal response of any totalitarian regime. Any government may try to cover up when they have a serious drawback. So I don't think this is an organized warfare effort. I don't think that, because there are WHO sent a study team, and also many scientists are very closely looking at the molecular epidemiology of the virus. The viral subtypes are emerging, and also the way viral replication is taking place. Because if you look at the molecular epidemiology of the viral subtypes, and if there is no conclusive evidence that it began from a lab, and it is, we could reach out towards, we can reach out to the what you call the X patient and the X animal, from where exactly it could have landed. We have some certain understanding about it, and it could have been jumped from a species probably 30 or 40 years ago, and it came to the wild animal. This leads to another issue, actually. How do we consume meat? Because in the most of the South Asian context, the meat eating context, we know that wet market is part of our culture. In many countries, we can buy the meat and process it right in front of it. It is not processed centrally. And we know we buy a chicken from the local the street stall. But what's happening is that we don't know what minimum essential quality control from a virus bacterial point of view, and an ordinary chicken shop stall owner may not know how to control it. So at some point in time, we may have a centralized quality control for the wet market system. This is what message is coming up. And also, many people challenge the idea of meat eating itself. I'm not getting into that extent, but I'm going to challenge very strongly that we have to look at the quality of food. Food safety, food security is an essential component of health security. And the food security is a state responsibility, ensuring the quality, not only civil society, because the technical capacity of the state to reach out to ensure the quality of the food distributed and food processed. And the biggest danger is that the way our wet market is operating in Indian context and South Asian context and Chinese context. Anybody can just chop off a chicken and distribute and share it and sell it. And this has got a great innate danger of, that maybe that particular chicken, that X number of chicken may be the one who is carrying a virus escape from the another species. So in future, this could be the possibility. We know that H1N1 virus, when we talked about it, it mostly came through the chicken pen. But that is also a reflection of how we process the food, not only the meat. I'm not only talking about our wet market, our food processing and food purchasing, food procurement, food logistics is going to be a major challenge. We know that in the food logistic chain, contamination can lead towards a large number of people could be infected and affected through different viral with the bacterial infection. So these are the future challenges we're talking about, our ensuring our food security, health security. So from that point of view, I mean, there are many challenges, but I'll not subscribe to the idea that this is a militaristic operation and it's not, and I don't go for that to that extent. But it may be when the initial breakout occurred, the information may not have shared at the right time. I leave it that way.
Okay, next one more question is in the chat.
Okay, there is a question from Stanley. While you have highlighted the lack of resources being assigned towards healthcare by the government in the budget allocation, what can I as an individual do to ensure that we as a nation are not in the same situation what we are in today? One, you can demand to the society that you should invest in healthcare. That should be part of the agenda for all the parties. I'm not saying one party. There should be a bipartisan agenda for health for India. All the parties should agree on one thing. As a nation, we should invest 5% of the GDP for the next budget. And we should work towards creating a bipartisan health agenda to escape from a next pandemic. And one way it is expanding our healthcare system, healthcare preparedness and healthcare infrastructure, and also the monitoring system and the diagnostic system. And until we increase our resource investment, resource allocation for health, we can deal with it. It is not one party system, it's not one party decision, it's a bipartisan. At least collectively today, we had to take a national agenda on health. And maybe this is the least bipartisan issue. Probably this is one initiative like an individual or society or a civil society can come out with one country, one health agenda and 5% GDP for health. And as an immediate solution for how to deal with our healthcare catastrophic health expenditure, as a country, we cannot progress unless we invest in healthcare system. That's absolutely clear. That's a message coming from the COVID pandemic. Thank you.
Doctor, I can just add one sentence here. Stanley, for you, for just your information on lighter side, it took us 16 years to convey to people that preventive health is very important in Sahel Foundation. 16 years. But today with pandemic, people are realizing there is a value. So as an individual, I think little bit of civil activism has to come in the health sector. If you see, civil activism is more in all other sectors, but not in the health sector. I think that's my take which I wanted to share. Okay, doctor, there's another question. We can have last two questions. One more is there on the chat box. I think it is
whether the same virus is Dr. Samaroy Chowdhury?
Yeah.
Okay, whether the same virus is changing the character with more vibration or a new virus enters in the second wave of the pandemic, any publication on this issue from the international journal like Nature? Yeah. There is many studies which we are closely monitoring. If you look at the molecular epidemiology of COVID pandemic, maybe that's one way to keyword you had to search for it. The subtypes are coming, and this subtype replication is not a new phenomenon. Those who are familiar with HIV infection, AIDS infection, there are HIV1, HIV2, then there are subtypes, HIV1, A, B, C, D, HIV2, A, B, C, D, E, F. So the naming of the HIV that time, HIV A1 and 2, then subtypes. So many of the pandemics, many of the epidemic is viral replication. Depends on the geographical, depends on the population group. It's very, very normal because we know that the HIV history of HIV infection, this also went through the similar experience of a viral replication and the subtypes. So some subtype is becoming more stronger than certain subtypes. For example, HIV2 is more virulent than HIV1. So those kind of combinations are coming out. And the same thing is happening in the subtype in the COVID pandemic. And what now we call it as Indian subtype. And earlier it was a UK subtype, Indian subtype. The why Indian subtype? Because purely because of the number. We have a large number of pool of viral pool. And then the probability of a viral replication is much higher in such a large population. But it doesn't mean that it can happen only in India. It can happen in any other neighboring countries. But interestingly, look at the South Asian countries didn't come through. It also may be lack of diagnostic system, because to come out with the viral subtyping, we need a very sophisticated RNA monitoring system that many other countries they may not have. So one thing is very clear: we have enough scientific evidence and data to share that the same virus is replicating. And we also have parallel to other other viruses in HIV-1 and HIV-2, and the similar the epidemic history of the HIV virus as well.
Professor Thomas, I have a question. Can I give you a question, Professor?
Please go ahead.
This is your last question, yeah, please.
My wife is 75, I'm 81. Both of us have taken a co-vaccine, both the doses, but we have not gone through the COVID test. Will it be harmful?
See, the testing may not be harmful, because the testing is nothing to do with your immunity or your physical capacity. You just measure to what extent you're prepared, to what extent either even the vaccine is into your system, or to what extent you are exposed to a virus. And also, there's no particular reason unless your symptoms. I'm not getting into the clinical diagnostic thing, that's not my expertise, but general understanding is that unless you're a simple or a diagnostic reason, there's no need of going for it. And just for the sake of your own mental anxiety to deal with going for, it may not be normally promoted. I would suggest that you should deal with your special case with a physician who is specializing in epidemic care, because there are many other nuances, because you are 75 and 85. So you need to deal with that issue on an individual case basis. So I would suggest you should consult and discuss with a physician on this issue. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor. Thank you, Professor.
I think we'll have only last question of Mr. Sachin Kulkarni on the chat box. After that, we'll conclude this issue.
As there is going to be more of vaccines coming up, what would be the criteria for selection? Selection of the vaccination. And right now, whichever vaccine is in the market, take it. That's the first criteria. Because the variations of efficacy may be a little bit 40, 60, because most of the vaccines are minimum 50% efficacy. And remember that all the vaccines are tested in some population, not necessarily completely representative population, but the vaccines are tested to a large population. And initially it is tested, now it is used by a large millions of people, let me put it that way. So that way, whichever vaccine, we have about almost 24 vaccines in the pipeline, and another few, 7 or 8 are already in the marketing stage. And the efficacy, in some of them, efficacy goes very high, 98%, some 60%. But in the given context, whichever you get it, you can access it, you take it, because that gives some relief. May not be the 100% relief, and the 100% relief may not come to the vaccine at this stage. Probably the vaccine efficacy may be improved over a period of time. And from that point of view, I won't say that this vaccine is better than that vaccine, because in the given context, whichever vaccine you can get cancer, all went through the almost similar clinical process, all went through almost similar process of the peer review process, and all are still under the close observation of the scientists and researchers and the regulatory mechanism. And no vaccine is just left out for getting vaccinated. All the vaccination are very closely monitored by not one agency, different agencies, different individuals, and from a different point of view. That way, my message is that whichever vaccine you can put your hands on, or whichever vaccine is offered to you, take it.
Thank you. I think we will come to a conclusion because it is more than 90 minutes now. I think it was a very, very great program, informative, and I think Dr. Joe was at his best. I am really grateful to all the people for participating, patiently hearing, but we will just take another 5 minutes. We have with us a very supportive member, Colonel Alan Burby. He is a retired person from the Indian Army, served Indian Army for 20 years. Then he was with Tata's for 20 years. He was heading the Values and Ethics Department of Tata's for many years at TMTC, Tata Management Training Center. Presently, he is retired, but he is a well-known consultant in the field of values and ethics. I requested Colonel Alan Burby to conclude. And he's a very big support to Sahel Foundation. Thank you. Over to you, Colonel Alan Burby.
Thank you, Mohan. Thank you,
Thank you, sir.
sisters and brothers, participants from the Sahel Health Foundation fraternity. Thank you so very much, Dr. Joe Thomas. For me, I'm going to share with you my experience today. It's been absolutely once in a lifetime experience that in less than 70, 80 minutes, you brought the world to our doorstep. You brought the doorstep to our homes. We are now absolutely illuminated with the kind of experience
Thank you,
and
sir.
the
Thank
data
you.
that you brought
Thank
to
you.
us. And I know what this means. Your expectation was very subtly worded, but I know the weightage of that responsibility. Sahel Health Foundation, President and all trustee members, and I am offering my services and all my friends as well, those who can volunteer, to make an action plan based on your guidance, based on what we've been illumined by today, to help a small section of society far more effectively than we've done before for the COVID pandemic and those ominous possibilities of other pandemics coming our way in a double whammy sort of a system. God willing, it doesn't happen, but if it does happen, you've spotlighted the need to be prepared. You spotlighted the need to invest. You spotlighted the need to be cognizant of the kind of damages and the kind of irreparable hurt and burden which is happening on a personal front, a family front, a societal front, a national and international front. Indeed, a few nuggets, which is something that I'm going to read from a small notebook that I've taken, Dr. Joe Thomas, just to recap very quickly for the sake of the audience and myself as well. The onus of responsibility, rather than us look at what the world should do, look at what global bodies should do, look at what the nation should do and what the state should do. I think it's our time to step up to the platform and look at civil activism. And within the civil activism space, what can Sahel Health Foundation continue to do and expand in doing in matters related to the following: how to balance individual rights with collective rights, how to become more prepared in ensuring food safety, food security, and food logistics in the existing pandemic and the ones that are likely to continue and the new ones likely to come our way, to be less ill prepared in sustaining good health for all concerned to the extent we can influence and impact their lives at a personal level, family level, societal, national level. You highlighted right in the beginning, the understanding is important for what is the cause and consequences of this pandemic, the impact of the pandemic in terms of the social dimension, the economic, cultural, and mostly the political dimension, which needs to really shift and move or reinvent itself. The endemic to epidemic to pandemic journey challenges, particularly in the mind space in terms of perceptions, thinking, and institutional preparedness. The challenge of the misinformation cloud and how you spotlighted the need to verify, validate, go back to the source, and unless we are convinced not to pass on the message, just because we believe it's a good message and we believe we are acting from a space or a inner governance space of goodwill to somebody else without really verifying or validating, we could in all probability be doing more harm than good. Fantastic take-home messages of acting, thinking, reflecting with human-centric values of compassion and empathy. I don't think ever before in my life has the need for the orientation of the mind and the body for others been more explicit than it is now in the last 15 to 16 months. I'm reminded of a small story from South Africa several decades ago. And it sums up in one word, which is Ubuntu. I guess some of us on the call today will remember this word. And Ubuntu, spelled U-B-U-N-T-U, is an African word which has got universal appeal in its meaning. And the meaning is, I am because we are. It simply means I do not exist if I do not believe that you are also as important, if not more important. It's together that we will survive. It's together collectively we'll succeed, and not selfishly or individually. It's this others orientation which we have to really step up on. We have a whole lot of notes, and those notes I can assure you, with the permission and the approval of the President of Sahel Health Foundation, sir, we will put our minds and hearts together and within a week to 10 days send you an action plan. And we would like you to help guide us to see what we can do more powerfully and beneficially at the local level, before we look at frontiers and horizons outside Pune. And I thank friends from all over the world who joined this call, and so many of you from India, our native country. Let us step up to the plate and show that India, like we've donated and we've given vaccines to 60 poorer countries than us, can do far more in what we are planning to do, irrespective of the poverty that we have, irrespective of the inadequacies we have. Do we have a heart big enough? Do we have a soul large enough? And do we have a spirit strong enough to do this? I believe, fellow Indians, we can. Back to you, Mohan. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Alan. I think we are already exceeded the time, but I think more than 80 people were present till now. Thank you so much, Dr. Joe. Once again, it is always a pleasure to talk to you. And thank you all the participants for being with us. I would request you to please join the Movement of Science Foundation, either through membership or by contributing your ideas, facilitating, or whatever it is. And I request Dr. Joe to be a permanent guide to us so that we do something great. And Dr. Joe owes to Pune because his PhD is from Pune. So I think you owe us something. Please give us something. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Great weekend to all of you. Stay healthy and stay safe. Thank you. Bye.
Thank
Good
you.
night.
Thank you very much. Good night, sir. Good
Thank
night.
you, Dr.
Good night to everybody.
Good
Yep.
night, Dr.
Thank you very much. We are